Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Beyer from GAI Insights, and welcome to our daily GenAI news briefing, where we discuss and rate top news items. Our team of AI analysts rate each article as essential, important, or optional for executives and leaders at companies. Our discussion today will be led by John.
Morning, everybody. Welcome. We have a lot of interesting stuff here, everything from analyzing old scrolls to thinking about what it might mean for agents in the context of our work, as well as labor productivity through a nice new study from the folks at SHRM. So on today, I'd like to, Akash, if you could give us our first article, please.
Sure, John. So the first one that we have for today is from OpenAI. So there is a report from the information publication that OpenAI is developing software that will operate devices and automate tasks.
Awesome. Adam, you weigh in on this? I know this is a pretty short pointer.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. This is an interesting idea. I think it can bring up a lot of really scary thoughts when you consider giving over control of your system, right, to an agent. And at the same time, this article itself, I would rate optional. It actually references another article that is behind a paywall, so I don't even know what the source of their information is. And at the same time, we shouldn't be surprised that OpenAI is continuing to develop more complex and elegant systems and agents that can act on our behalf and help us do things. It's a great concept. I have nothing more to go on. I wouldn't want to bother someone with this piece of news.
Gotcha. Other folks? I don't know, Amanda? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Unmute.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself on this one. Yeah, for me, I guess I'm more optional here. I didn't see anything that really stood out to me that I would say is particularly useful for our audience personally.
All righty, let's go optional. Next.
Okay. So John, do you want to take this one? I know you're very excited about
Well,
this
I was going to ask Paul. I know Paul is a student of the classics here, so he's got a great Kenyan education.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I love this article, and Akash, if you can scroll down just a little bit, they have such great visuals. But this is Vesuvius, a famous volcano that went over a town, and it has all these 2,000-year-old scrolls that were encased in carbon and very difficult, if not impossible, to read. And a team of students and PhD postdocs figure out how to do this with technology. And I think it's yet another example of the edge, the opportunity edge that these new technologies show. And for executives, I rated this as important just so they understand another example of what's becoming real. And second, the importance of really working with younger minds who understand this technology to find out where those transformative moments are in their industry. So I rated it important.
Other folks?
Yeah, I'm with you, Paul. This is exciting, especially how the first part of the experiment when they scanned it, right, and figured out how to go layer by layer in this clump of ash, essentially. So that was the first step, and then the AI step is the second step. So this is like massive technology-wise advancement. But it is optional for it's great, but it's for our audience to get them to read this. It's, I don't know, maybe optional.
Luda, I would say optional as well. I just think it wouldn't really reach like relevancy for most of our audience. The only thing that started to cross my mind was they're basically looking at the layers of ink within something, right? So can we start to digitally scan entire documents, entire books, right? And then it starts becoming.
Oh no, like we might have lost Adam.
I think we lost Adam there.
I would agree with optional. I think this is a good
It hasn't been
read.
just in a long.
Sorry, Adam, you came in and out there.
Yeah, I'm back. I was just thinking that capability, if you can effectively OCR an entire document at one time, that could have far-reaching capabilities in terms of all of that latent data that is just such a tremendous manual effort for us to digitize at this point. But we can't do anything with it right now. It's just very interesting and promising. So it's optional to me too.
Granted, they had to overcome a whole bunch of problems in so a whole bunch of teams worked at it, and I didn't go in GitHub to look at the code, but I'm sure this is very, very fascinating. But again, for our audience, this is still optional.
See, I came out the other. I agree with Todd Bro in our audience here saying, look, Vesuvius is a major solution in ML. Their algos can be applied in a ton of other domains. I agree with that. I really think this thing is essential. First of all, because I've learned that there's actually a career called the papyrologists, people who study papyrus. I mean, who knew, right? I mean, that's like my wife Eileen wants to be the almsgiver in the Vatican. There's actually a job.
I'm not sure it pays well, John.
Huh?
I'm not sure it pays well.
Yeah. But the I look at this and it's like, oh my God. I mean, just think of, they created a new LLM that allows them to deal with the semantics that they're discovering as they discover the combination of ink and the capability. These things are lava covered ashes and they're getting information out of them. I mean, if you're in manufacturing, if you're in medicine, it might be great new stuff here. I mean, to me, it's at least important, if not essential.
Okay, well, let's put it important. It's a major breakthrough. I give it to you. It's just the relevance of that I'm struggling with. It can.
You don't have enough faith in the imagination of our audience.
I agree. I think you can make it important, but it's really fun to read. To me, the biggest issue here that can make it important is the generation of enormous capability through the integration of a number of other things.
Yes, so these are three 20-year-olds doing it off the side of their desk. I mean, come on.
Well, there's been a couple of years worth of work by a lot of people to get the machine vision. Remember, these scrolls aren't even unrolled. They're rolled up. That's what's remarkable.
Yeah.
That's the piece. I agree. That's the piece that for me was remarkable. And the second
the machine vision, the creation of a new LLM, all stuff that's well understood, but putting it together made this remarkable achievement possible. So that's a good message. That's important for people to understand, is that, the multimodal stuff we've been talking about, the putting together of piece parts is where the real value explodes, in my opinion.
And they put a team specifically to figure out how do you actually make those layers legible in the and they used a whole bunch of technologies to do this first step. So okay, let's put it important.
We're going important. All right, important it is. Next, Akash.
So the next one is a report from SHRM and Burning Glass, which looks at the impact of generative AI on the workforce. And one of the key messages that it highlights is that GenAI impact will be less on automating stuff and more on augmenting workers' productivity.
Awesome. Tim, want to start us off?
Yeah, it's a decent report to read through. I think, the length of it and the fact that there's not really any or significant data, again, which is a problem because it's just so early. So it's more of a framework. It's kind of a long HBR article, but the framework is good. There are lots of interesting ideas, nothing that we haven't discussed before in terms of the industries affected, the places, the way they're likely to be affected, and, a fair amount of, I would call it, speculation about how it's all going to work out. But they went right down to the companies within industries they felt would be most affected. So interesting. They didn't, talk about their methodology much, so it's hard to get real deep on how high the quality of their scoring is. But, I would rate it optional, maybe essential for HR workers, because SHRM is a big organization in that world. And you want to be abreast of what they're saying. And they're good ideas here in terms of how you're going to have to address the workforce. Biggest interesting idea was the aging of the workforce and the particular dearth of talent in certain areas. It's going to be a challenge. And I would probably say that seems to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, just to put a point on the aging of the workforce thing, with that graph where they show as roles shrink, the average age of the participants in the roles goes up.
Right.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, although the implication there is there could be real problems in youth employment, right? Or younger employment. Let's not even call it youth employment, but younger employment.
Other folks?
I had one comment I found randomly interesting. There's a figure in there where it talks about occupations most affected by GenAI. And I find it interesting. Management was right at the top, and then legal. And that's funny to me because of that whole legal debacle where a lawyer used GenAI and this and that. And I don't know. Those two aren't the two that popped up in my head as the first affected by GenAI, but I found that kind of interesting, that graphic. That's on page 13.
Unless I misunderstood it, the color coding determined the ones that would be most affected. So management at the top, it just had the highest salary, but it wasn't the one that would be most
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the graph was a little confusing to me because that struck me at first too. I think it's blue is color coding for most, or yellow is color coding for most affected this round, and blue is most affected during some previous round. So legal and computer math are the two top affected.
Which I wouldn't argue with. I think that's correct.
And I agree. Management would be surprising. I thought the same thing at first.
Yeah.
And even legal, it's yellow. It's weird to me after those challenges.
That's visual. The one thing that I would argue with them is and I agree initially, there is an argument about blue collar won't be affected this time around through automation. I totally disagree at the end of the day. I think the first wave will definitely be aimed at knowledge workers because of the WINS framework we've discussed before, that symbolic manipulation is primarily the area of knowledge work, and that's the easiest thing to do out of the box. But we've also been talking about the incredible progress with robots. And that says to me, you put the robots and the LLMs together, blue collar is going to be affected as well. It's just going to take longer.
Yeah, I thought the analysis of the delay in actual substitution, I forget the role it was, but shows help me out here, guys. What was the role that people thought was going to go away right away, and then it actually went up in terms of demand?
Bank tellers.
Bank tellers. Thank you. Yeah, but it eventually went lower. I think the impact on professionals, is going to be really interesting. And the other thing is there's a claim in there of 45% increase in corporate profits in 2023, which they didn't document a lot, but that seemed like a really big number.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're coming out important or optional on this. I didn't hear any essentials.
I said optional.
Optional.
Yeah. So, John, I remember the Microsoft report and the reframing of the automation versus automation and innovation, and automation and substitution, right? So this is framed as automation and substitution, arguing that it will automate and it will augment. So it doesn't really reframe it into innovation and automation. So I say optional because this is somewhat confusing report. It only focuses on substitution and kind of gives you data of the sky is falling scenario. I really, it's a good report to know, but I wouldn't recommend reading it.
Okay, optional it is. Next.
Okay, the next one we have is from healthcare domain. So there's a new foundational model called Checks Agent for chest X-ray interpretation.
You're on mute, John.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take a whack at this one. I rate it as optional, but man, it's essential if you're a healthcare provider. It seems like they've created not only a great data set with this, but also a new capability to do interpretation, which is superior to the interpretation done by radiologists for chest X-rays. So talk about a high value domain where people are going to be using this, and all, whether it's labor cost substitution in the developed world or as access in the developing world. Because the lower cost X-ray devices and other imaging kind of technology that's getting out there. So I would rate it as optional because it's very narrow and it's in the lab. But if you're a provider, essential.
I agree. Yep. Optional, but definitely essential for healthcare. And this is just one more piece of evidence in imaging, which is in the early stage already. There have been actually even controlled studies showing that colonoscopy interpretation is improved substantially by adding AI interpretation to physician and radiology interpretation. And I think you'll see the same thing here. I hope it doesn't become substitution, because at least the evidence to date, and I hope we follow the evidence, is that the best solution is augmentation. That the AI tends to pick up things that the provider doesn't, and the provider tends to pick up things the AI doesn't, and the combination is improved healthcare. Maybe not reduced costs so much, but improved healthcare.
Yeah, accuracy of the diagnosis. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's going to be interesting because radiologists make between $300,000 and $800,000 a year, and so there's going to be a lot of pressure, especially if private equity keeps buying providers. There's going to be a lot of pressure to drive.
Yeah, it depends on what your goal is. Is your goal immediate cost, or is your goal health of society, which in general improves GDP and ultimately creates more wealth?
Yeah.
So we tend to be focused on the short term because it costs so much goddamn money every year. Excuse my French. But the reality is better diagnoses usually lead to better GDP, which is what you really want.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. All right, so we're going to go for optional, unless you're a provider, in which case you got to read this right away. And as Todd points out, if you're a radiologist, you better start upskilling yourself. All right.
John, if you're a radiologist, you can start reading scrolls.
Yeah, you'd be a papyrologist.
There's not enough good radiologists, so they're certainly not going to lose their spots. But yeah.
Well, just quickly on, I was talking to a client some time ago about for pharma and things like that. Can you own the information envelope around the disease state? So, whether it's GE or Philips or Siemens who provide these devices, or in other places where you have oncologists and cancer, because cancer by itself is I think bigger than the GDP of France. So who's going to get access to this early diagnosis? Because these models the Google models, diagnosed earlier, diagnosed more accurately. So, early indication allows you to sell cancer drugs in faster and all that other stuff. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting dance. Next.
Okay. So the next one is from Google and DeepMind. So they have proposed a new self-discover mechanism for LLMs, and it has led to improvement in even GPT-4's performance.
All right, Luda, can you lead us off on this one?
I put it as an optional because it's early, as a trend or as a method. I guess as a method, it's a very important method to watch, because what they were able to do is essentially, with the techniques of natural language processing of how we reason to solve a problem, they built agents and gave LLMs certain examples of how this happens. And that's stage one. And on stage one, they essentially get LLM to discover what's the best method to solve a particular problem. And then in stage two, apply what was discovered in stage one to that problem that is given, right? And so what they recorded on the 25 problems yet, right, is, or test cases, that they got a performance advancement of 10 to 40x right? So this is great, but it's early, and it also takes us forward towards general intelligence, one step to that, right? So it's a massively important progress step, but I think it's yet not there.
Fascinating. Yeah, I don't know. Amanda, do you have an opinion here?
I'm on team optional for this one as well. I think it's going over quite a few quote unquote features that are to come. But again, nothing really jumps out at me. I guess the only thing, and I could be making this up in my head, is I get the feeling of, and others have mentioned on previous calls, about how we might have LLM specific to certain tasks. So there's going to be different variations of these models depending on industry, tasks, things like that. So for some reason that drummed that up in my head here. But again, that's really deep diving. So still optional.
Yeah. So there are questions our audience is asking, what's this self-discovery? So it's essentially a self-discovery of a method to solve a particular problem. So it's like we think about a problem, we might subdivide it, we might apply some prior methodology of solving this problem. This is how humans work. So what they're trying to do is get LLM to self-discover that structure of reasoning for a particular problem, because it's faster. Right? If you know the particular reasoning for a problem, it's faster to come to a solution.
Yeah, and some of the numbers are amazing, right? They said, and when it fits right, it's 30 to 40% improvement in outcome and 1,000 to 40,000% less compute time, which is
Right.
massive. I mean, you know, and so, okay, we're still going optional. Adam, we going optional?
Really?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, thanks. I'd agree it's optional. I think it's interesting in that in some ways, as I read into it, they're starting to compartmentalize into the different parts of our own brain structure in terms of how they're approaching formulating hypotheses and approaching even the concept of self-discovery. And, you know, when you don't know, what do you do, and how do you come up with a plan? And this will be very important, especially with robotics and automation, but it's super early, so it's optional.
Right.
Yeah, there is a paper underlying this paper. So this paper is about the paper that Google DeepMind folks published in the University of California. So it's Todd is suggesting that people read it. Maybe we include it in this discussion because geeks would want to read it.
All right. Well, let us say it's optional for now, but let's review the paper as part of the next one. That we review the article about the article, right? So let's review the paper and see if we still feel like it's optional. Thank you, Todd, for pushing us to that. All righty, Amanda. Little did I know, till I was looking at it, I gave you what I think is the easiest assignment of all, which is our next one. You get to watch a video.
Yeah, I did. So this to me is optional, but I find this video fascinating for a couple reasons. So one, at the beginning, where it kind of says, they say I won't get my degree. And I find that kind of controversial because here there's so many people in the educational space thinking GenAI is going to basically ruin students, like, what are we on, Gen Zers now? Right? And so they put that right at the beginning. And I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting. But the points I found fascinating is about how it's going to help write code and, you know, figure out organic chemistry for you and like all these like high tech and like smart things, right? And then it's like your everyday AI companion at the end. So I find it optional, but again, I almost push people to watch it if you haven't, because I just found the ad interesting in itself. That, and in the article it says tech, something like tech ads are expected to be lower than they have been in the past in the Super Bowl. And I find that very interesting because, yeah, the Super Bowl is about beer and, you know, all this stuff, food, right? But I found that odd with all the tech advancements. I'm like, why this year would they pull back on tech ads? But anyway, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is important, actually. I think it's certainly from a marketing perspective, this is brilliant, in my opinion, from Microsoft. I also think it's important because the message here, which I think is a good message for Microsoft and also true, which is also a great combination, you're not sort of deceiving the audience, is This is not about search, folks. Okay, this is really not about search. If you really want to get the value out of this stuff, don't think of it as a slightly better search engine. Think of it as a real co-pilot, as a real assistant that can do complicated tasks to help you. So yes, they may be over the top in suggesting how far along they are in accomplishing those tasks, but indeed they do help on those tasks quite a bit, as we've seen over and over and over again. So I think that's the interesting thing, is the big message is this is not about search. And it's also interesting that it's perhaps a shift in strategy, as it says, because Microsoft is not making much progress against Google. So John, you and I could talk about that for years with path-dependent economics and the difficulty of dislodging information economies. But so now they're trying to change the game, and I think rightly so in that sense. This is not about search, it's about more complex activities.
And Tim, the one thing I'd tag on to yours as well is that, the 3 or 4 companies we're working with employee training, one of the real challenges they have is to have the 30,000, 7,000 employees understand these are new tools. How do we change the cultural norm that this isn't a novelty tool, but a real thing? And this is, a nice free advertising, at least for the folks who watch football in my large organization.
Yeah, so I think as an article, it might be optional, but I think as a message that co-pilots type tools can be real work improvement and real co-pilots. And this is a strategy shift or a different frame of thinking, right, for what that AI is introducing at this stage. So I think Tim has a good thought to market as important for that reason.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Oh, no, go ahead, Adam.
Oh, thanks. I would say it's important in the bigger scheme as I look at agentic systems, and when we have more complex systems that can act on our behalf, right? And we have an agent, a super agent, sub agents. There was the Google, the OpenAI blog a month and a half ago or so on that as well. It used to be that there's Copilot for Bing, there's Copilot for Microsoft Dynamics, M365, Win 11. And this is signaling a very strong shift and a standalone app now, right? You don't go to Bing and use Copilot, you use Copilot. Right. You're going to use Copilot everywhere, and it's going to be your Siri. It's going to be your Copilot. It's strategically, it's actually, I feel it's a significant shift in their approach, and it's setting the stage. Sure, maybe they did lead a little bit, but people are certainly writing Flappy Birds with ChatGPT, so we're not far from having it write video games. And they're setting the stage for that larger picture where you have a co-pilot, and it's going to go worry about all those details in the individual systems and whether you want to be in M365 or Bing or whereabouts. So for that reason, I'd say it's important to pay attention to this shift.
Yeah, I actually rate it essential because I think that it's a change in mind frame. We talk in our research report how the WINS framework in terms of what's going to be impacted, power tools for this kind of work, which this really talks about. And then, every individual can be a team, and every team can be a team of teams. We saw that, in the Vesuvius project, 3 folks did a lot of work together, but man, they did unbelievable work. And so I think the idea that this is going to unleash creativity in the creator economy, and I flashed to, I spent a couple of weeks in India, and then I came back to the US, and I was just coming back from the airport, and I was just thinking about the difference in terms of capital substitution for labor. So like it happened to be snowing out. So, there was somebody with a bobcat, doing the walk. And then I was looking at a construction site, and in India, they had created a bamboo-based scaffolding where labor had put the whole thing together. And in the US, they had 1 crane and 2 guys putting up a scaffolding. I just thought, just think of the massive, our assumptions about the capital substitution for labor and the power of a couple of folks. We're doing the same thing. We've been doing automation in the physical world for about 120 years. We've been doing automation in the structured symbol world for about 60 years. We are just at the beginning of automation, semi-structured, unstructured, dialogue, agentic, and I think we're going to see massive unleashing. Anyway, and this to me helped make it really easy in terms of mindset change, coming from the market leader that is making $2 billion a week in EBITDA. and it has a market valuation of over $1 trillion. I mean, anyway, I guess we'll go with important, but I think there's a huge mind shift.
Yeah, let's reflect it in the summary. I think that you're right that we're living in the great times, and it's really a time of breakthroughs.
Yeah, I feel it's
As long as we figure a way to include people in this, because when the professional class starts to get disjointed, pushed out, that makes for very uneasy politics.
Yeah, I can go with essential here, by the way, because I mean that's exactly the point I was making, right? Is this is a real shift in mindset. So, and it's 30, 40 seconds. It's not a lot of effort.
All right. So here we are, optional, important, optional, optional, optional. I mean, optional, optional, important. Going all the way from, over 2,000-year-old unreadable scrolls to Microsoft telling us about the unleashed future for mankind. Anyway, hope you all found that useful. Look forward to talking to you tomorrow. I want to thank our analysts and from GAI Insights and the team here. Have a great